Good morning and welcome to the third call in the METL Coalition's COVID-19 Business Assistance webinar series. My name is Hugh Carter and I'm the Vice President of External Affairs for the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce. Some of you have been on previous calls, many of you probably have not, and so you may not be aware of what METL is. In the past, the Wichita and Kansas City chambers have been the predominant voices in Topeka during the legislative session. So METL was formed because the leadership of the four METL chambers, Manhattan, Emporia, Topeka, and Lawrence, felt that there was a need for a regional voice for business. And we believe that the four METL chambers represent an important voice in the middle. In addition to many common interests, the METL Coalition represents nearly 3,000 Kansas businesses. Our motto is stronger together, and together is exactly how we're going to come through this challenging time. To that end, we are pleased to have chamber leadership and interested members from each of our four METL communities on today's webinar. These webinars are going to be held on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. for the foreseeable future. And while we do have a maximum capacity for up to 500 participants, if you're not able to attend for any reason, these webinars are being recorded and will be made available the same day through the METL chambers and other local stakeholders channels. With that, let's get into today's topic. We're pleased to have Karl Klein of the Kansas Small Business Development Center and Will Katz of the KU Small Business Development Center with us to give a general update on COVID-19 relief efforts for businesses, a glimpse at the business landscape post-COVID-19, where we are now, what is next, and they'll be answering as many questions as possible regarding application processes and other frequently asked questions. I should say a little disclaimer is that everything is fluid, as you can understand. There's such a large package coming out and the system is obviously getting overwhelmed to an extent. I know it's frustrating and challenging, and that's why these calls we think are important. Just last week, I think Thursday evening and Friday morning, the banks were getting their directives, and the information the banks got was different than what we had been given just on Wednesday and been giving out. So these gentlemen are going to give you the best information available today, and we just have to understand that down the road, things may change. To ask your questions, please, at the bottom middle of your screen, there is a Q&A button. Use that button to submit questions, and we will get to as many of those as we can. If questions we cannot get to, though, we will include those with the recorded seminar. We'll get those out to you. Will and Karl have been kind enough to say they will answer any questions that we were not able to get to during the webinar. The chat button, if you would, please reserve using that for any suggestions you may have for future guests for these METL webinars. So with that, gentlemen, in the interest of time, I won't go into detailed biographical introductions this morning. I'll just say that we're very pleased with how responsive you and your teams have been for us. Thank you again for making yourselves available this morning, and I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, is it you first, Will, or Karl?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. Thanks, Hugh. I really appreciate it. I think you all are doing great work. It's important work. And I have a couple more little framework pieces that I want to kind of get out there before we get into Q&A. The first one is that, yeah, I'm a little dubious about being recorded answering these questions given the nature of the situation and the fluidity of it. I think if somebody tried very hard, they'd be able to find me on video from 7 to 10 days ago saying stuff that turned out to not be correct as of today. But I think it's important enough. There's so much of an information vacuum out there, and I think Karl would agree with me. It's better to have the best information that you can getting out there. This is a really tricky call because there are however many people on here, and there are a lot of variety of levels of information access that people have. So you've got there are probably people on this call that are super high information access. And so I'd put, CPAs and tax preparers in there. And so some of these folks may have really super technical questions about the calculation of loan forgiveness in the PPP. They might have done calculations for some of their clients comparing the PPP to the advanced employer tax credit information. There may be kind of moderate information level folks who probably most maybe larger small business owners on here. Maybe they've started down the path of the PPP, and maybe they have an understanding of the difference between PPP and the idle loan. And then there are going to be folks who are just asking the question, oh my God, I still don't even understand what I should do or where I should go. So it's a little bit of a challenge to address folks that are at all of these different levels of information. We're going to do the best that we can. And again, I think it's important to get the information out there. The second little framework piece that I want to give you actually was given to me by my colleague at the center, Christina Meese. And she got this from National Development Council, NDC. And I do want to talk a little bit about the stages that we're going to see moving forward. I think right now we're in a stage that you'd probably call rescue. We need to get resources into the hands of small businesses right now so that they can last until they have a chance, some of them, to reopen. After rescue comes stabilization. I think moving forward, when businesses do start reopening in a larger scale, their world is not going to look like what it looked like in February, unfortunately. I think most business owners would agree that they can't be as efficient operating at 40% capacity or 60% capacity as they could be operating at 100% capacity. But they have to get through this stabilization piece to move forward. And then the third stage will be recovery. I'm hopeful that many or most of these businesses will survive. There's a distinct possibility that they will survive with more debt on their balance sheets than they have today. So the big question about recovery is how can we position them to move forward in the best way that they can? It is critical to all of us that the recovery is as complete as possible. We need as many business owners on the other side of whatever this is. We need them to make it from here to there, because these are the people that are battle tested and they've proven that they can manage debt and they can manage employees and they can understand how to access capital. And as a society, we can't recover unless the small business come with us. So I think it's important for us all to recognize that mission. Get everybody we can through to the other side, because we'll need them. Karl?
Yeah, so thanks, Will. All great advice. I've got a couple quick short perspectives that I'd like to put out there. And I know we've got some small business owners on here, the accountants, CPAs, attorneys, all small business owners of themselves. But the audience that we're serving with the SBDCs, we're looking at your typical small business owner, and I think you have to put yourself in their shoes to really get the perspective of what they're seeing. And they're seeing an overload of information, maybe on some material and subject matter that they're not all that familiar with. Some have accountants, some have attorneys, some have CPAs, some have a trusted banker. Others don't have those relationships. So we're seeing both sides of that coin and each end of the spectrum. A lot of sleepless nights for those small business owners. So not only are we providing advice, but we're providing some empathy, and we're providing an understanding ear for them to move forward with what the landscape looks like down the road in the future. And those stages that Will talked about, we're really spot on with what we're going to see down the road. The other component of this is post-COVID-19 to help that strategical preparedness for these owners to get ready for business after COVID-19. Some business owners are going to have old inventory. They've missed their seasonal selling opportunity. There's going to be markdowns. Some of their suppliers might not be around. So from a strategic standpoint, it becomes important to look post-COVID-19. What does your market sector look like? What does the recovery, the speed of recovery, and maybe look at some of your resources and make some plans now for options. Maybe it's additional suppliers, additional credit. Look at your accounts receivable. Some of those items that haven't been talked about enough that need to be thought through for the rebuilding of small business as we know it today. Thanks.
So I think we're going to jump into some FAQs that Karl and I have been getting. And so I think everybody's aware you can go into the question and answer box and submit some questions for us. The first few questions, we're just going to share with you the questions that we've been getting. And I'll go first. The question that I probably get more than any other question is this: how do I apply for whatever it is that I can get on? So this is a tough question. There are a lot of different programs out there. If you just want an alphabet soup, the EIDL loan, economic injury disaster loan, is a big one. The PPP loan, payroll protection program, is a big one. There are some other sort of lesser known programs out there. EBL, emergency bridge loan, advanced employer tax credit is one. If you're in Kansas, a lot of us heard about that hire fund, so you may be familiar with that. All I want to do is distinguish between major programs out there really briefly: the EIDL, economic injury disaster loan, and the PPP, payroll protection program. To apply for the EIDL, you have to apply to the SBA. It is a direct loan from the SBA. This program's been around for at least 20 years. It's a well-established program, although some of the procedures are a little bit different. They're used to rolling this out in 2 or 3 counties that get hit by a tornado. They're now rolling this out 105 counties in Kansas, another 77 in Oklahoma, and however many counties there are in 50 states. But this is directly a direct application to the SBA for the SBA to loan you money. The PPP loan is a little bit different. You will apply to one from your bank. So the SBA only acts as a guarantor in this situation. Your main contact will be your banker. And so usually I would advise people to start with a bank that they already have some relationship with. So again, the question is, how do I apply for whatever I can get? Those are probably my first 2 answers. Apply to the SBA for EIDL, apply to your bank for PPP. Karl, it's your turn.
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. And a lot of confusion on this. And how does an owner figure out what's the best program for them, and if a program is necessitated by this downturn? And those are the questions that I get daily. And it's really a walkthrough of their capability at the current time with cash reserves and what they've done to mitigate financial expenses for whatever the term of the period is going to be that they think their business is going to be off. A lot of folks that I've talked to have not had conversations with their utility company, their landlord, and other debt providers to see if they can get some forgiveness to reduce the amount of debt that they need to take on to survive this downturn. So one of the things that we typically talk about is take a cash flow or look at a cash flow scenario for the next 13 weeks to see what that looks like and what you can do with your employees, what revenues look like when this is over. Make a calculation then based on the programs that Will just talked about, what you really need to do. And the other important factor that we always talk about is if you do take the EIDL loan, you do not have to use it all. You can pay it back. There is no penalty for early payback. So I think that gets missed a lot, is people think, well, I'm taking all this debt, but you can have the money, but you don't have to use it for what it's specified for.
So the second question that I had on my list, and I just saw a question pop up in chat instead of Q&A. And so I, for whatever reason, can't get to that. Whoever asked it, if you want to ask it in the Q&A so I can see it again, that'd be awesome. But I think my second FAQ question might address it. It's, I've applied to the SBA for the EIDL, but I haven't heard anything yet. I was expecting $10,000 in 3 days. Will that come? So I cannot exactly answer that question. What I can tell you is, again, this program is being rolled out at a much larger scale than it's ever been rolled out before. So I think the SBA is struggling to scale up. Probably a week and a half ago, we were told that it would be 3 to 5 weeks before any of the actual before you get contacted back. I would suspect we're still at 2 to 4 weeks. That's just a guess. So the $10,000 advance on the EIDL will come after they have processed your application. So around the time that you hear back from them. Here's a little pro tip for you, and I can't guarantee the authenticity of this, but I talked to somebody yesterday, and he was asking me how to check whether or not his loan was actually processing, because he'd been waiting and he expected the check in 3 days. So he called the SBA district office, and they told, or the national office, and they told him that if check your confirmation number. If your confirmation number ends with a 3, that's a good thing. You are definitely in line for processing, and there's nothing else that you need to do to check on it. If your confirmation number does not begin with a 3, what that probably means is that you applied early, and you applied before they changed the interface on the EIDL at least 2 or 3 times, of which I'm aware. So if you applied really, really, really early, your confirmation doesn't begin with a 3, I would call the SBA helpline for EIDL. And gosh, it's 800-659-2955, I believe is the number. I should have brought that with me, but I think that's what it is. If my confirmation number didn't begin with a 3, I would probably call that number and see.
That number is correct, Will.
Hot dog.
The alternative there too is to send them an email at disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. Yes.
Okay. So you're up, Karl.
Okay, so my next question that I'm getting a lot is unemployment an option for me as an independent contractor or a micro business owner? And yes, it is. The pandemic unemployment assistance program is just rolling out. And again, this is one of those wait scenarios where Department of Labor is waiting on the details. But the latest from the Department of Labor website and in the Lawrence Journal World this morning, they were talking about the fact that you can go ahead and go to the Department of Labor website and register for unemployment, that would be a good idea. Even if you get denied, you are in the queue for whatever comes about through the federal assistance program. And that may make a lot of sense for business owners. One situation was a business that just started right at the time of the pandemic, had no revenues to show, was only in business for a few weeks, did not have the ability to go back to the previous employer. So this was a really good option for them.
Okay, so I'm going to go out on a limb with this one. But here's a question I get quite frequently, sort of a double question. How do I calculate my PPP loan forgiveness? And should I take the PPP and pay my employees, or should they go on unemployment? Probably a controversial question for me to even take on, but I will tell you the advice that I'm giving people. Number one, I would not calculate your PPP loan forgiveness unless I did it in conjunction with the bank that you are getting the PPP from. My understanding is that it doesn't really matter what you do right now. These are all going to be estimates, and the actual forgiveness won't be granted until June 30th. Why? Because things could change. You could think that you're going to put X dollars on payroll based on some date that you think you're going to open, but that may not happen, and that will affect the forgiveness. Everything you're doing right now is an estimate, and my strong advice to you is to do that in conjunction with the lender that you are using for the PPP. As for whether or not you should take that PPP and use the money to pay your employees or on unemployment, my advice there has been do what makes sense for your business. If you were going to have employees working for you, then you should hire them back, or you should keep paying them. I'm not sure that I would take people off of, if you thought that if you would have had them on unemployment, I don't think I would rely on PPP loan forgiveness to kind of use that to use stimulus dollars to pay employees through PPP, rather than use stimulus dollars for employees to get paid through the pandemic unemployment assistance. If it makes sense, hire them. My take on the PPP is that it's actually best used for that stabilization period. As I mentioned, hopefully in a few weeks, you'll hire employees back. The thing is, you're probably not going to jump right back up to 100% of prior revenues. You may have a period where you're working at 40 to 60% of revenues. Guess what? You will be inefficient with regard to the use of labor during that time. So that's a great time to use the PPP dollars to offset that labor inefficiency. In addition, I think it's a little bit less risky for you to do that. As a business owner, I'd be a little bit concerned about relying on loan forgiveness, knowing that it's not even going to be calculated until for real. So if I'm right and it all gets forgiven, great. If I'm wrong and I've used PPP dollars to pay employees and then that doesn't get forgiven, then what I wind up with is kind of a hit to my balance sheet on the back end of it. I would take the hit to the balance sheet if that's what I had to do because I was doing it for reasons that made sense to the operation of the business. But always come back to that. You are a steward of the business. We need you through on the other side. We need everybody to make it through to the other side. So you have to do the things that make sense for the business. And in my opinion, that means don't just use the PPP as an offset for unemployment. Okay.
Very, very good. So I've had this question many times. Can you combine the EIDL and the PPP together? And that comes up often. And the typical scenario would be somebody that had applied for the EIDL loan, they had received it, then they'd want to go back and get the PPP in addition to that. A couple of important aspects to remember is that they cannot be used for the same purposes. In other words, the PPP is designed for payroll and the EIDL loan is designed for a lot of other expenses that wouldn't fall into the PPP. If you go to get the PPP, the EIDL loan and the $10,000, if you had just the emergency grant, would be deducted from the loan amount for the PPP, and the EIDL would also be rolled into that if you got more than the $10,000. So those are important considerations to take into account if you're going to try to do both to help your business.
Karl, should we jump over to some of these Q&A questions? Can you see?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, first one, what are the pros and cons of the PPP? Well, Sarah, I think probably the biggest pro is that there is an element of loan forgiveness built into it. That's a pretty interesting thing, and it's a new thing. The EIDL doesn't really have forgiveness as such built into it. It does have that advance, but that's not the same thing as a forgiven loan. So that's pretty major. If you can get forgiveness on those dollars, that's a pretty big pro. To me, the biggest con of the PPP is that it's a new program. I think there's a lot of stuff that we don't really know exactly about how it's going to work. I think banks are struggling on the back end with the e-trans system. So they've certainly accepted a lot of applications, processed a lot of applications. I'm not sure how many of these have actually funded yet because banks are struggling on the backside in terms of their interface with the SBA. I think anytime you've got a new program and that program's got a cap, and I think it's $349 billion, which sounds like a lot, but when you start applying that across 30.2 million small businesses in the United States of America, I think it's certainly possible that the program runs out of money. In Kansas, you saw with the higher fund, originally it was going to be $20,000 for 250 businesses. They ended up scaling that back to $15,000 so that they could apply it to 330 businesses, which still left 1,000 of the applicants that came in the first 72 hours without awards. So you have to recognize that there's certainly a possibility in the PPP that as many things as have already changed, you could find down the road we're going to give 80% of what the calculated forgiveness portions were, or 70%, or anything could change. I just think that there's a lot that's still up in the air. To me, that's probably the biggest con. Karl?
Yeah, the next question here is one business owner with 3 lenders stated none of the lenders were permitting state taxes and the payroll cost. Any suggestions on communicating to lenders these state taxes are qualified? And that's a great question. That really speaks to the overall confusion, maybe misinformation, misunderstandings. I think when you're talking to lenders, lenders are going to make these final decisions, and having the lenders reach out to the SBA offices within the region is really the best scenario. It's very well publicized. For example, the Wichita office with Wayne Bell, Michael, those guys have been very responsive to emails. And I would suggest passing that information along to the lenders and asking them to directly reach out to the SBA to get an affirmative answer to the question and any other questions that they might have. Turnaround times have been less than a day on the majority of questions that I've seen come through.
Next question is from Linda. How do you check on the status of the EIDL? Bank is recommending adding the $10,000 advance to the PPP advance. So my understanding is that, again, I don't think you can really check on the status of the EIDL. They're just all in processing. If your number begins with a 3, what I'm told is like, sit tight, they're coming. If it doesn't, I would either call or email the SBA office. Bank is recommending adding the $10,000 advance to the PPP advance. I'm a little confused on that because I don't know if there's really a PPP advance so much. Maybe what they're referring to there is that the any advance you get if you don't take out the EIDL will offset any PPP forgiveness. So Linda, I'm not exactly sure how to answer the question. It sounds like you've applied for both, and I think that's the right thing to do. And then I would just work very closely with your bank on that PPP. You'll have some decisions to make, and some of those decisions may not be obvious yet for a couple of weeks. And I don't think you'll get the EIDL advance for a couple of weeks anyway.
Okay. Next question is by Wayne. Should the last 12 months of payroll costs be used or the payroll cost for 2019? If last 12 months, what month should be the beginning? Example, March 2019. Will, you addressed this earlier, so I'll let you jump in on this one.
So that is one where when I read the interim final guidance on Sunday night, there were absolutely conflicting statements about that in the interim final guidance. I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it. It said it one way at one point in time, and it said it the other way at the other point in time. So I think that's part of the problem there, is that it leaves open probably for banks to interpret this different ways. So I think I would work with whatever bank you're working with to make that calculation for that loan. I don't think there's any other way to do it but to rely on their guidance.
Brad's got a question here. Just jumped off my screen. But basically it asked about the $10,000 and that loan, and if that was going to be forgiven or not. If you read the language, it says up to $10,000. And I am not familiar with exactly how they're going to determine the amount of disbursement, but I would imagine that it's going to be based on a working capital calculation based on your sales and revenues. I don't know that. That's just speculation. But it is up to $10,000, not an automatic $10,000.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is a reference to the EIDL advance.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think I have certainly seen apocryphal tales of that it's not a full $10,000 for everybody. But yeah, I can tell you in prior EIDL, in prior disaster lending situations, they did make an award that didn't have to be paid back if you didn't take the award. So the next one is from Brad. I have one salaried employee, would like to keep him on the payroll as long as possible. He has applied for unemployment because the benefits are so good right now. If I keep him on my payroll, is there any chance he can receive unemployment benefits? I would say probably not. I think your best place to get solid dispensation on that would be KDOL, Department of Labor, that's administering the unemployment program. They're probably the best ones to answer. But it would be unusual. Possibility I could think of is if you had like written a letter of furlough, but I don't think you can keep paying him and have him receive benefits.
Thanks, Will. Carl, can I jump in real quick with one?
You bet.
So I got this one posed to me yesterday, and so a company was approved for PPP loan late yesterday. They need to use 75% of those proceeds for payroll. May they provide temporary raises to achieve that 75% without that affecting their potential loan forgiveness?
Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason that that would be doable under this program as long as the 75% of the proceeds used went to payroll. That would be my understanding of it. I would ask them to check with their banker if they've already been approved for loans, but that makes complete sense to me that that would work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, Hugh. I agree with that. I think if you read the language, it's sort of contingent on maintaining or increasing payroll. And so that would fit into the category of increasing payroll. The one caveat I'd give is that I wouldn't give anybody a raise from under 100,000 to over 100,000, because the PPP does have that threshold in there where the forgiveness calculations, anybody who makes 100,000, any portion of the over 100,000 is taken out of the forgiveness calculation.
Good
Gotcha.
point. The next one's from Anonymous. Isn't the EIDL deducted from your PPP loan? If it is, and the EIDL 10,000 isn't forgivable, then should you avoid the EIDL and just keep the PPP application at full value? The EIDL was designed for a quick cash injection into a business. And if you look at all the spreadsheets when you go for the PPP, it is a line item on there that is deducted. But the intention of the EIDL loan was to get cash into business owners' hands as quick as possible, whereas the payroll protection program was a little more nuanced with payroll and all the different additives that go into that equation.
Yeah, and boy, if I could just add to that, avoid the EIDL is something that that's advice I just couldn't give anybody. I think the two programs work together, and if the $10,000 in free money offsets $10,000 in loan forgiveness, which is free money, like all that is, it means you can collect the $10,000 in free money twice. But no, I would not avoid the EIDL, certainly not for that reason. Next question, also from Anonymous. Are there programs out there for businesses that were already struggling with debt service before the COVID epidemic hit? Example, a business that was behind on their 7A loan payments, but not defaulted yet, trying to work it out. With the closures, the efforts to work out have stalled. A business in this situation needs help too. So that's a really good point. And I think that by my reading, most of the programs are designed to, like, they're not designed, for example, I've had people ask me, hey, can I take my EIDL and then go buy a whole fleet of new trucks? The programs weren't really designed to help struggling businesses, certainly not anymore. They weren't really designed to help you use stimulus dollars to go grow your businesses. There is an element of the CARES Act called the Small Business Debt Relief Program. So this has gotten as much airplay as the PPP because it's not really free money. But we've certainly had some discussions about it, because what we're trying to help small businesses do is find some cash flow relief. So I'm not an expert in this at all, but my understanding is that any payment you make to a bank, any bank on any SBA loan after March 27th, the bank was supposed to get back to you and tell you that the SBA was going to make their first payment and defer the next 5. Is that how you understand it, Carl? So that the payment that you send to them, either they send it back to you or they credit it as the first payment on the back end of that 6 months.
Yeah, I see more, simplistic explanations where they're going to take care of principal, interest, and loan fees on 6 payments. That's the way I've understood it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the behind on 7A payments, not defaulted, trying to work out of it. I mean, obviously that means that there's a relationship with a bank, and not to pass the buck too many times, but again, I think the real answer there is to talk to you. If you want to give them something that they can search the SBA portal for, say, Small Business Debt Relief Program. It's part of the CARES Act, and they could go look that up probably.
Yeah, I would just tag on to that with the fact that I think this is maybe an underutilized program by some 7(a) loan participants to just have, as Will said, that discussion with the banker and see what they can and can't do. It just makes sense to have that conversation. The next question is for Sarah, and it's a good one. What are the situations that would make the PPP unforgivable? And to Will's point, going out and spending the money on anything but payroll, rent, lease, and interest expense would make it unforgivable. I'm going to read in between the lines here and say also that less expenditure on payroll reductions doesn't make the loan unforgivable, but starts reducing the amount that's unforgivable. So it's a tiered structure based on that 75% endpoint, that if you were to get down to 60%, there would be approximately a 15% range that would get carried forward for that 2 years of debt service after the 6-month waiting period.
Next question, anonymous. Where are the exhaustive breakdowns, definitions for child support delinquency, past due child support being used? I keep seeing this as a disqualifier for any type of funding and need to understand what it means. And the questioner says that they prefer not to have assumptions or speculations as an answer, which probably means that I'm not going to be qualified to answer. I probably have to send you to one of the SBA district offices or the customer service line, because that is, I'm not even sure that they make those public. I think that my understanding is that they kind of look at those things on a pretty case basis. So I don't think I'm going to be able to take a swing at that one.
Yeah, I have to take a pass on that too, as well.
Okay.
From Linda, they're recommending adding the $10,000 to the average monthly payroll calculations. Not really sure what this is, but the actual $10,000 from the EIDL grant reception is deducted from the payroll calculations. Will, do you see anything that I'm not seeing there? They're recommending adding the $10,000 to the average monthly payroll calculation. I mean, payroll is based on historicals.
Yeah.
Not sure how that would be calculated.
Yeah, no, I'm not really sure. Again, the only thing I really know about with EIDL PPP crossover is that $10,000 EIDL advance against PPP forgiveness if you don't take out the rest of the EIDL. So I would say subtract it from the forgiveness calculation before I get to the payroll calculation, but I'm not sure. Next one, we applied for the EIDL loan, never received an email confirmation. Does that mean it was not put through or there was an error in our end submitting that? So I think the way I read this is that there is no confirmation number. I guess advice number one is check your spam box and make sure it didn't sneak in the back door. I know my KU email has cranked up the spam filters full blast, which I appreciate, but occasionally it pulls emails out that I would have otherwise received. So make sure it's not in there. The only other thing I would tell you to do is call the Sba Customer Service line, which I gave the number earlier, 800. Oh man, I forgot it now. 269-9500. You looked it up for me. But I would call the Sba Customer Service line.
Will, that number is 800-659-2955.
2955. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would mention too, I actually filled out 2 of the EIDL loan applications. When it's completed, it pops up with a confirmation number, says application submitted, your application number is, and it's a lengthy number. You will not receive an email confirmation for your application submission. So if you're looking for that, what you can do is when you submit it and it pops up, you can print that screen.
Oh, okay.
You'll be notified through email, the email address that you provide, when they're processing your application. So
That is a great clarification, Hugh. Thank you for that.
you bet.
So I've got the next one from Anonymous here. It's pretty lengthy, but it's basically speaking to the $10,000 in the forgiveness, or the fact that that loan will not have to be repaid. I'd rather not answer that online because there's been multiple sentences written about this. What I will do, Hugh and Will, I'll take and cut this out and send it to the SBA to see what kind of response they get and send it to you. Okay?
Excellent.
Yeah, okay. Next one from Sarah. We had an employee resign effective April 3rd of 2020. Do we need to hire a replacement employee before June 30th in order to get forgiveness? So I think what you're getting at there is that if you had 11 employees and now you have 10, then you won't have the same head count that you had before. And the concern there is that an overall reduction of 1 in the head count would impact total forgiveness. If I'm understanding that question correctly, the answer is no, you do not need to hire a replacement before June 30th in order to get forgiveness. Keep in mind, the only forgiveness that you'll get is for payroll between whatever that start date was and June 30th. So if you paid somebody before, if you pay people less over that period of time than you paid before, that's okay. What that may look like is your forgiveness gets calculated here, and then when your forgiveness gets estimated here, but your payroll's lower, and so you get your forgiveness only at this level, but that will be calculated based on what you pay people between now and June 30th, by my understanding.
The next question, I have from Jeannie. I have a nonprofit organization, 501c3, that does pay for 1.5 people. However, it is the city that pays their staff, and the 501c3 organization reimburses the city. Do they qualify for PPP? Go out a little bit of a limb here and say yes. If it's the payroll is on your books, where you are actually distributing the W-2s and paying those employees, then you would be the filing party for the PPP.
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting one.
I think so too.
Yeah, and I mean, my reading, city pays the staff. So it's more like a contractor expense.
Probably have to have some clarification on that. If it's a 1099 or, I think the bottom line is, who is the provider of the W-2 for that employee? Who is the registrant of that?
Next question, Anonymous. Can a business utilize both the PPP if accepted and an EIDL loan, as long as they aren't for the same uses? I would give you a categorical yes, absolutely. Again, you do have to be aware of a little bit of a potential overlap. If you get only the advance on the EIDL, that'll offset PPP forgiveness. But honestly, one of the pieces of advice that I've been giving the most over the last weeks is apply for both. Don't shut the doors on either of them, because they have different uses. They can both be very valuable. You know, there are all kinds of other strategic plays out there, like you could possibly refinance a PPP into an EIDL when you get it, or you could possibly refinance an EIDL into a PPP. But I think it's pretty key to leave both of those options open, and to me that means applying for both now. As it becomes clearer, your strategic move may become clearer too.
Yeah, exactly. Have either of us heard that the EIDL advance is being based on the number of employees? So no, I have not. I've actually not heard of the exact basis for the EIDL advance, but that would not make it true or false. It could be based on employees, who knows? But good question. I don't know the answer.
I have heard apocryphal sources that have indicated that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a little bit of a, behind the magic curtain kind of a deal as far as for where we are. Can one apply for the disaster loan assistance for two different businesses that have been hit hard? That is an anonymous question. And the answer, I believe, is yes. Is that how you understand it, Karl?
Yes, I've actually posed this question to the SBA. I had a business that the owner had two separate entities. The qualifiers there were the fact that they had two separate entities. They kept two separate books for those entities, and they were able to provide proof of the separation if an audit was to ever come up. So I think those are words to heed. But yes, you can do it with two different entities and two businesses.
I might interject on that one too. The application asks, of course, for your EIN number for your business. So I think as long as you've got, two different LLCs or whatever they may be, as long as you've got two different EINs, I think you've got two different applications.
Great. Yeah, very good.
Can you explain the $100,000 salary limitation of the PPP? Salary limitation is based on gross wages for the PPP. And my understanding is if you make over $100,000 a year, they don't think that you are probably in need of assistance under the PPP. It's probably a little more lengthy than that, but that's the simple explanation.
Yeah, I think, and I from what I understand, if, again, let's say you've got 5 employees, 4 of them make $90,000 a year, and the 5th one makes $130,000 a year, I think that you get to calculate it as 4 times 90, 360, plus 100,000 for that last employee, so it'd be $460,000 annually, which you then divide by 12 and multiply by 2.5 to figure the forgiven portion. But I think it's just that for employees that make that much more, they're not going to reimburse you to pay them that much more. Ooh, do we have any more?
You got one more from Gina down there, Will.
Okay. I was in discussion with someone about hiring her to help me catch up on some back billing. It would be a temporary job. If I hire her now, could I use PPP funds to pay her if I'm approved? She's not yet been hired. Ooh, that's a tricky one. I'm curious if there are other employees. Wait a minute, she says no, right? If there are no other employees, and this would be the only person on payroll in a temporary job for that period of time, that's a tricky one. I'm going to have to give my default answer of apply, and I think they're going to be in the best position to kind of help you walk through the way that they interpret it. And that's what matters more than the way Will Katz interprets it. So that's what
I'm in complete agreement. This one would be one that went to the lender for the decision, that because I can think of different scenarios why you might want to do that versus another scenario, and it leaves a little bit to the imagination.
Ooh, I can actually answer this next one. Oh, but it's your turn now.
Oh, well, go ahead, Will. I'm not there yet.
Anonymous, what is the basis of the EIDL loan calculation? Not asking about the $10,000 component, the advance, but the actual idle loan opportunity. So my understanding is that they take revenues for last year. They subtract out cost of goods sold for last year, leaving you with gross profit for last year. Divide that number in 2. So the basic calculation is 6 months of gross profit.
Yeah, there has been a lot of discussion on that gross cost of goods sold line that you're putting in there. I think another important takeaway is that is a starting point, that you will have a conversation with a representative from the SBA that will walk and talk you through, and they should have access to your tax returns. So through all of that discussion and calculation, there should be an amount that gets decided on by you. You don't have to take it all. You can come back and get more later, But like I said earlier in this conversation, is that you don't have to spend it all. You can put it in an account, hold it there if you need it. If you don't need it, you can pay it back.
Wow, we're out of questions, Carl. Oh,
Oh
wait.
no. Uh-oh, we got the farm. There's one for the farmers under anonymous there, Will.
Yeah, you want that one or you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
Has any more information about farmers being able to apply for these loans with having only a few seasonal employees? My understanding is that growers, most ag businesses are not eligible for the EIDL. There are certain agricultural value added businesses that are, but if it's basically growing and harvesting stuff, my understanding is that they're not. And I had reached out a couple times in the last week to see if USDA had any programs that were being spun up here. I didn't get a very satisfactory answer on that. So again, I don't know if you know anything more about that, Carl.
Now, the question has kind of come up several times with the rural nature of our organization. Not a solid answer. Probably the best answer from a producer standpoint was that if you're filing, I believe it's an F5 on your tax return, then you do not qualify for the EIDL loan. That seemed to be the most definitive answer that I've seen or received.
That's right.
I don't know if that's any help or not.
That's great. Well, gentlemen, you've been very efficient. I'll echo the last comment that just popped up on the screen there, and thank you so much. This has been very helpful. I'll just quickly revisit something I said earlier on the EIDL application. When I had said you won't get an email confirmation, you will get an email once they are processing your application, as I said. But I didn't say that they expect this to take about a week. So I'm going to give it 10 days probably before I check back. But since they're saying to give it about a week, you know, I'd wait at least that long before you follow up on your application. And then also I mentioned that companies with different, or folks that were looking at multiple applications, if you have 2 EINs, that's employer identification numbers, just for clarification. Then if you have different EINs, I think you're safe in doing different applications. Again, gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Everybody on the call, if you would like, there is a recording of this call that'll go out later today. So you can go back and look at anything you may have missed during this call, or if you signed on late. Also, be sure to go in and register for this Thursday's call at 11 a.m. That will be with Laurel Searles. Laurel is the Unemployment Insurance Director for the Kansas Department of Labor. She'll be explaining the ins and outs of the payroll protection program and answering your most frequently asked questions as businesses, but also feel free to pass this one on to your staffs as well, because we know there's a lot of questions, both employers and employees, when it comes to unemployment applications and unemployment insurance. So that should be a good call. Please register for that. And again, gentlemen, thanks so much for your time, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. Appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everybody.